Welcome to the Tudor Dixon podcast. I have one of my friends with me today from the Clay and Buck Network, Karol Markowicz. She is not only a podcaster, but she also has a few different columns in the New York Post and Fox News. And she's got a great personal story. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Hi, Tudor. So nice to be on with you.
I'm excited because you have this great backstory for what is going on in the world right now, which I think is so important because so few of us actually have this. I was reading a little bit about your story and how you and your husband tell your kids all the time, like, you need to really appreciate that you were born in America. And that to me is something I don't think we get to hear. And we are so spoiled when we are born here in America.
Absolutely. You know, I always think about this. So I was born in Russia. My father's from Ukraine. And so it's funny you say that I have a perspective from my history about what's going on in the news. And I'm Jewish, so I care about Israel. There's, basically any war going on anywhere in the world affects me personally. So
Right.
Right.
But the way you talked about your grandmother coming here with her sister and the fact that she could openly profess her faith and practice her faith.
Yeah.
It's like something we just take for granted.
Definitely. So I was born in Russia and I came to the US. And every single year we celebrate the day that my mom and I arrived in America. And I think about this because all I've ever wanted was my kids not to have an Americaversary. I wanted them to just be American day one and born here and there's no other backstory. But I've come to think that the backstory is kind of important because it makes me appreciate, I'm telling you daily, I think to myself how lucky I am to be American. And that's a tough thing to achieve when you've been born here and you're just lucky enough to have started your life here, which is what my kids are. But I want them to take with them this idea that they hit life's jackpot. This is the greatest thing that could have ever happened to them. They're so beyond blessed to be American. And I want them, even if they don't have a date to celebrate that they arrived in America, I want them to really appreciate how much they have and what it was all the people that came before them and did it for them. And that's really important.
So I think that's something that the left is using, though, and you've made this point too. It's like, hey, we're all immigrants. We're all immigrants at one point, and immigrants built this country, and everything is built by immigrants, and that we need to have open borders because of that. But you also recently, I'm just going to read something that you wrote in one of your columns recently. It said, there were no prepaid debit cards or free hotel rooms for us. Someone had to sponsor us, and we had to promise that we would not accept any public funds. There was a system in place, and we followed it. That, to me, is something people don't generally hear. You had to promise not to accept public funds?
Right. You're not allowed to come here and get on welfare. And I say this, I was a refugee. So it wasn't like we were economic refugees. Oh, we just wanted, a better life for our kids. I mean, obviously that was part of it. But Jews in the Soviet Union were persecuted. My parents weren't allowed to go to certain schools. They weren't allowed to hold certain jobs. They were sent away to different parts of the Soviet Union to work. And you had no everybody had it rough in the Soviet Union, but Jews had it especially so. So we were escaping actual religious persecution. And still, when we got to America, there was no sense of like, oh, we're owed something or somebody needs to give us something. We understood that what we were given is the chance and the choices and the possibilities that America has. So yeah, and that should be the system. You should have somebody sponsor you. And a lot of times it has been like a religious agency or a church or etc. But now it's like, we had this open borders for all these years, and the people arrived here expecting something, like expecting not just the promise of America, but to be taken care of. And they broke the rules to get here. So another part of my story is we didn't just come from the Soviet Union straight to America. Italy agreed to take in the Soviet Jews that were leaving and have them apply from Italy to other countries, whether or not they would be accepted. And
wait, I want to stop you for a second because you said they agreed to take the Soviet Jews. There was just a small period of time where Jews were allowed to leave, right?
Exactly, right. It was a small window, and Italy wasn't saying, hey, come live in Italy. No, they weren't saying that at all. They were saying, we can be the staging ground for you to apply elsewhere. And Israel said, anybody who doesn't get taken in by other countries, we will accept them. Any Soviet Jew, you have a home in Israel. So when you got to Italy, people applied to Australia and Canada and America, and you had to prove that you wanted to be in these countries. You had to prove that you wanted to be American. It wasn't like
Imagine that.
Yeah, I know. And it was like my parents, had always dreamt of being Americans. They had loved all the stories of freedom and possibility. And, it's different than what we've had. And I think we should go back to a system where immigrants are welcome, sure, but they have to follow the rules. They have to have the right reasons for being here, and they have to want America to succeed. I think that's a really easy call.
And your dad left before you. He was in the United States for a year before you came.
That's right. My grandmother and her sister got permission first, and they were older women. And and I say they were older. They were in their 50s, but back then, 50s was a very different look than
I know.
it is today.
I know. I'm like, okay, calm down on the older thing.
Listen, I'm almost there. But they were, had to start their whole lives all over again. They didn't speak any English. My grandmother's sister was closing on 60, and they got permission to leave first. And the thinking was they didn't want to go without my father, who was the only child. But they got permission, and my father said, you have to go. You're going to help get the rest of us out. This is how we're going to do it. They left first. Then my father got permission. Then my mother and I.
And these are, to me, so this is the manipulation, is these are the immigrant stories that we hear from the left, but they're not doing it this way. I mean, this is not the same as having an open border. And that's not to say that there are not people that want to come across in this way, but the open border creates a situation that is dangerous and hurts people.
Well, that's exactly it. You can't have both an open border and an immigration policy like the one that I came in on. You can only have one of those. And so for the last, however many years we've had this open border, legal immigration was pretty limited because we had this huge influx coming in. And I don't blame Americans now for saying, hold on, let's clear up the border. We have all these illegal immigrants here. Let's slow down the legal immigration system too. I get that. I really do. But the idea is that all those people who jump the line are hurting others. And I'll tell you one more quick story. My mom's sister stayed in Russia. She had a son. She has grandchildren. She was never going to leave because she would never see her grandkids. But she couldn't get permission to visit my mom in the United States. The US would not give her permission because they assumed she would come on vacation and stay, because a lot of people do that. She would have never done that. But, my mom used to joke she could just fly to Mexico and walk across the border and nobody would say a word. But trying to come to visit her sister legally was not possible for her. I mean, that's the kind of system we created by not having a system.
Right. And I think that, we have the same situation here in Michigan with a lot of our immigrants from Muslim countries. They're like, because these people broke the rules, now our family members are not trusted to come and visit. That's exactly the problem that people don't understand. So when you did come in, you came to New York. You lived in New York your whole life. And I love the way you describe New York. You came into this kind of lawless city where there were a massive amount, over 1,500 murders annually. And crime was out of control. It felt like it was chaos. You were, even through high school, you were concerned about going out and drugs and robberies and murders. And then you talk about the political changes and the changes of Giuliani and Bloomberg, and how there were years that were that New York was thriving. It was becoming a beautiful place to live. And then de Blasio.
That's exactly how it went. So I arrived in 1978. I'm 1 year old and a little under 2. And it's, I'm little, but I heard all the stories about how my parents got to a city that was crumbling. And
How sad.
Carter is president. It doesn't seem that America's on the right track at all. They're very worried about the future. They don't feel like they made a mistake, but they're definitely like, this isn't going well. And then 1980 happens and Ronald Reagan wins the election and America's on a better track. But New York takes a lot longer. The 80s and 90s in New York, the early 90s, were very lawless. All my memories are of like my grandmother clutching her bag because it was a very common thing for someone to run by you and snatch your bag. And I heard gunshots, I saw drugs way too early. And I grew up in a fairly rough part of Brooklyn. And it was all heading just downward spiral. And then Giuliani becomes mayor. And the fact that he even wins in New York City, people need to understand how insane it was that a Republican could win in New York City. But it hit rock bottom, and that's where they had to finally elect a Republican. And things start to change rapidly. You see a different sense on the streets. Just quality of life starts to improve. I mean, something little like they wouldn't let subways leave the subway hub with graffiti on them. It changed the look of the city. Somebody could spend all night graffitiing a subway train, a train car, and in the morning they would just paint right over it. And that person had just wasted all this time because nobody was going to get to see that. That ended up making people graffiti less frequently on the subways. And that kind of thing really mattered. This broken windows theory, it worked. It worked for so many years. Giuliani was mayor for 8 years. And then Mike Bloomberg for 12 more years kind of coasted on all of those achievements. He did a lot of great things also. I don't want to say he coasted. He actually did some really great stuff too. And then de Blasio came in and he coasted for the first 4 years until his own policies started to kick in and New York started to crumble once again.
So I lived in New York in 1999 and 2000. And I rode the subway I didn't see any of the bad things you talk about. It really was a beautiful time. And I think, and that's my memories of New York are so great. Now when I go back, or even when I see on the news what's happening, the rise in crime and just these policies that you talk about, de Blasio's policies of cashless bail and letting people back out on the streets and not locking up criminals, and those things, they matter, and they matter so quickly. I mean, that's the shocking thing is, why is it so hard to understand that these things matter? And then you have Mamdani, who's out there campaigning on legalizing sex work. And you just think about letting criminals out and then having women as these sex slaves, because we all know what that means. I don't understand how people don't say, wow, how could you have a system where you legalize pimps and have women as slaves to men? I mean, this is insane. How is this happening in New York City?
Yeah, and New York keeps just trying these bad ideas. Like, New York is the only city in the country that has legalized marijuana for use on the street. Like, you smell it
it
everywhere.
Smells so
in New
bad.
York. Yeah, and it's sad because I would say that a previous version of myself wanted to decriminalize marijuana, but nobody ever said legalize it for people to smoke in front of kids' schools, which was exactly what was happening when we lived in Brooklyn. And I only moved to Florida 3 years ago. We'd walk our kids to school, and people would be right there, smoking a fatty in the morning. And it was a different New York than what had functioned. And you could see the disarray developing, and all that kind of stuff goes together, right? We don't allow people to drink in the streets, but for some reason smoking weed, which actually affects other people with its smell, that's somehow allowed. And so all of this was just, and it's interesting about cashless bail. It was actually, Andrew Cuomo and then Kathy Hochul, they're the ones who pushed the cashless bail, and they're sort of considered the moderates of the Democratic Party.
Right, that's who that people are like, well, it would be better if Cuomo won.
Right,
what?
Right, exactly. What de Blasio did that really hurt the city was he demoralized the police department. They didn't feel like the mayor had their back at all. They just, when you have a demoralized police force, they're not doing their job at a high level. And I think what's interesting about this current race is that the current mayor, Eric Adams, is deeply unpopular. He can't crack 10% in the polls, but he's actually done a lot with the police department where crime level actually is down. He should be running on that every single day, talking about how he works with the police commissioner, Tish, and how she's really a great police commissioner. New York Police Department has become stronger and better under his command, under her command, but under his mayoralty. I think that would be the smarter move, but Democrats can never seem to run on crime being bad and let's stop that crime. It makes no sense.
And you see what's happening right now in Washington, D.C. It is popular to make sure that the city is safe. Exactly. And that's the crazy thing to see the Democrats bend over backwards to say this is a problem, that he's making the city safer. And yet people that live there, even Democrats that live there, are like, yeah, it's nice to not have to worry about getting carjacked. I mean, that is a terrifying thought that someone will, especially if you have kids, you're like, oh, at any moment someone could take my car and my kids would be in the back. It's just, it's insane that we have to think this way. I just saw someone who had their car stolen on Twitter talking about it this morning, or X, whatever we call it now. One of the other things I wanted to get to is that because of your background, you understand socialism better than any of us, and you lived it, but your parents lived it. And I think that you have this firsthand knowledge of how awful it actually was.
Yeah.
You make the comment about socialism because Mamdani has come out and said, look, we want to tax the white people more. And you said it in such an interesting way, because I think that a lot of us go, gosh, that's a terrible thing to say. But you said the cause of socialism needs an enemy. And that this is the way that they get people to say, oh, there are people that are hoarding more than their fair share. That's the enemy. We have to go after them. And then people jump onto that. Even people who are in the category of the enemy are like, I don't want to be the enemy, so I'll be on his side.
Yep. I believe that about all of leftism. Leftism needs an enemy. And if it doesn't have one, they start looking for one internally. You start being like, well, you might be a liberal, but do you really believe? Do you believe enough? And they start canceling each other. And we saw that again in the last few years, really, it hit a high. But what you saw was they couldn't really cancel conservatives. Like what they're going to say to you, oh, you culturally appropriated. And you'll say, so what? I don't care what you say. And that'll be the end of that. But if you say it to somebody on the left, they start getting nervous and they start apologizing, and they know I would never culturally appropriate. And so the firing squad is turned on each other. You see this all the time in leftism. And so they always are looking for an enemy. They're always looking for somebody to oppose. They're always looking for somebody who's the them, for us versus them. And so, yeah, that's what socialism is all about. It's about, they don't create anything. Socialism doesn't create anything, capitalism creates. But socialism has to inevitably say, those people aren't creating, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're not helping all of us, and they find someone to turn against. This was a common story in the Soviet Union. It's a common story in every communist place, and any place that really attempts socialism will find that they will have internal strife in this very serious way, because we can't all be equal. We can't all do the same jobs, and we can't all make the same amount of money. And it actually doesn't work at all. And nobody gets their lives improved. Everybody just gets their lives reduced and minimized. Yeah, I worry about socialism a lot. And, a lot of times you'll see the Bernie Sanders or whatever of the world be like, oh, what are you so afraid of? You're afraid of socialism? Like, yeah, I'm afraid of socialism. It has failed every single time it's been tried. When Bernie Sanders talks about Swedish socialism, and Sweden's like, hey, don't call us socialist. We are a capitalist country. They don't want to be socialist because they know that system does not function. And again, failed every time it's been tried is the message that I give to my kids, so that they won't support it when they get older. It is all around a failed system.
So you have that experience, but like you said, you can kind of go across all of these different wars and battles that are going on right now. Another thing that Mamdani has talked about is globalizing the Intifada. And you made the point that I think that, first of all, I think people are confused that this has actually happened before, and this is absolutely going out and just murdering people. It's a genocide. Yep. There is no, he says, well, other people define it differently. No, it's occurred twice in the second Intifada. There were thousands of people that were killed. And you make the point that it wasn't just Jews. Christians and Muslims were killed too, because suicide bombers, they don't ask your religion before they bomb you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And look, every time you hear about a car ramming through a Christmas market, they're not targeting Jews. And that is globalizing the Intifada. They want to bring the struggle, the ideas that they have to the rest of us. And Americans need to understand this is not Israel's fight. This is all of our fights. This is a Western fight. This is a problem that we're all going to have.
Well, you have somebody in New York that says, bring it here. How can it not be a problem we all have?
Exactly. And so when you do see these bombings happen in Western cities, they're not looking for Jews. They're not targeting Israelis. They're targeting Westerners. They're targeting Christians. They know what they're doing. And we need to be concerned about it. I hate the fact that some part of the right is turning on Israel, because I find it to be the first line of defense for the West. Like, I understand not caring about Israel. I even understand, we shouldn't fund them. Fine. I have a list of countries we shouldn't fund before we stop funding Israel, but fine. But the idea that they're not our friend or that they're not that first line of defense, it makes no sense. And it scares me that people are falling for that line.
And it's the scary thing is that it's people who have been trusted in the past, people that have massive followings. And I think they are people blindly follow some of those folks because they've said, oh, I've seen them as a trusted source. Do you think, how do you think this happens? Because I actually am curious because I think these are people who haven't felt this way in the past. But I had somebody once say to me, and interestingly, the person who said this may be teetering on the edge of this right now, but they said to me, you know, what happens is that someone sees themselves getting attention. They see their likes increase. They see their retweets increase and they go, that's the way to go. And I don't know if it's the money or it's the fame, but something draws them into it. And could they possibly really believe these terrible things about Israel?
Yeah. And of course, it's not just Israel. They believe terrible things about Jews in the US and elsewhere as well. And I mean, we don't need to name the names, but, some of the larger voices on the right have gone completely insane about this kind of thing. I don't know if it's money. I don't know if it's just the fame. There's definitely going to be a Jew-hating audience for a lot of these people. I don't think that that's surprising at all. The fact that they're leaning into it and are looking for those eyeballs and those downloads is upsetting, but at least you kind of know who they are. It's not, I find it comforting that they're not hiding this opinion anymore. If that's what they've always believed, like just say what you think and let us choose to whether or not to have any respect for you. And I've lost a lot of respect.
Expose yourself, then we know.
Exactly. I'm never looking to shut down anybody's opinion. I want to hear those opinions so that I know how seriously or not seriously to take you. And is there some other factor? Is there Qatari money? Obviously, we don't know, and so it's tough to speculate about it. But it certainly seems that some of the flips that have happened so suddenly and so rapidly definitely had some other factor involved.
Well, there's been a defense of Russia. Obviously, we're all watching Russia and Ukraine right now. Interestingly, I have a friend who is Ukrainian, and they said to me, I don't know if we trust Zelensky. People in my family do trust Zelensky. Other people don't trust Zelensky. And it's interesting to me also because when Donald Trump was impeached the first time, there were a lot of questions about corruption in Ukraine. Yeah. However, Russia invaded. This war continues. Donald Trump makes a fabulous point saying, why would we allow death to continue if we don't do anything? Another year goes by. Marco Rubio said, you know what? He's bringing these people to the White House and we had a historic summit. And if we do nothing, then another year of death goes by. Maybe another year of death will continue, but right now we're working really hard to stop it. What is your viewpoint on this compared to just sending money to Ukraine, which I know you said your father's Ukrainian, you came from the Soviet Union, so this is personal.
It is, but it is. And look, if I had my magic wand, Ukraine defeats Russia and that's it. But so again, my mother's from Russia, my father's from Ukraine, but we're Jews, so you were never considered Russian or Ukrainian. You were always this other separate category. So it's not like I have a national allegiance to it, but I just think obviously the country that was invaded basically should, hopefully can defeat the larger power that did the invading. But having said all that, I think Donald Trump is just remarkable in the last few weeks. I didn't always love Donald Trump. I've had my ups and downs with Trump. I think this term has been just sensational. I've been so pleased with so many different things. I love that he's trying to bring a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. I think what he's finding is that they don't have the same sensibilities that we do, that they're not as horrified by all the death as we are. It's just a different culture. It's a different mindset. Life is just not treated quite as the same way that we treat it in the United States. And I think Donald Trump is seeing that with talking to both Putin and Zelensky, that neither of them seem in a hurry to end the bloodshed. They both still want the wins that they were trying to get. I think that Trump has been just fantastic on this and on many other things. I've loved this second term. Trump 2.0 has definitely been my favorite Trump of all.
I think it is, you make a great point. It is hard to understand that life is not, it does not have the same meaning in other countries. I mean, honestly, even when I saw what happened in Florida with the truck driver last week,
Yeah.
and everybody was like, he's not even shocked by this. And I'm making no excuses for him. But I remember when my parents would travel to India for business a lot, they would come back and they would say, there's just a different meaning to life there. People would hit someone in the road and not think twice about it.
Right. It's very crazy to think that that is how life is treated in other countries, but it's important to remember that we don't behave the way a lot of other countries do, and that these countries have always kind of treated their people this way. And into the meat grinder sensibility of war has its roots in places like that. And so I don't know. I hope that Trump succeeds in getting some sort of peace agreement, but if he doesn't, I don't think he should see it as a loss for himself. I don't think he will see it as a loss for himself, but I think that it is a loss for the Russian and Ukrainian people, and it's because of the leadership and because of the culture.
He made this comment about the fact that he was doing this because he wanted to make a peace agreement and he thought that this would help him get into heaven.
That's right. He's become faithful. Yeah.
My pastor jumped on that this weekend, though. He was like, okay, hey, this is not biblical. That is not how you get into heaven. So
it can help. It can help. I think Trump getting shot, I really think he has become more faithful.
Totally. Because I'm like,
change.
This is a step that here he is talking about that, and I agree with you. It's like, it's so funny because you can be in your late 70s and still be young in faith and be learning. And that to me was like, yes, that is not necessarily what we believe in our church. And I know there are some churches that believe acts of service will get you there. But I do think that it's interesting to see him speak that way. And I think that is something that you talk about, being able to practice your faith and do that in New York. And I think that's why there are people who are concerned about this idea of what could be if New York changes. And I think about what you said about it being different in the 70s. And now, you have the potential for it to go a different direction again. But what do you think? I'll just end it on this. Mamdani has been a proponent of communes and taking over buildings, having communities buy the building. But now if you're in government, and he's been in the legislature for a while, so now if he takes over as mayor, what's to say he doesn't buy up whole communities and get rid of communities that were there? That's been a concern in Detroit. The minority neighborhoods have been purchased and bulldozed. What's to say that doesn't happen in New York, and then suddenly you have communes all over and religion is not allowed?
Yeah, it's not as far-fetched as it sounds to say that, because I actually don't think that he'll succeed in taking over buildings. New York just doesn't have the budget for this kind of thing, and they actually spend all the money they have and often need more. It's very wasteful city management, and I don't think he's going to be less so. But when he doesn't succeed in any of the things that he promised, when he's not able to freeze the rent, when he doesn't have the government-owned grocery stores, when none of that, when the free buses have failed completely, because they always fail, what does he do then? And I have to imagine he appeases his leftist base by going after Jews, by going after Christians. And I think that you're not far off to imagine that he's going to have a sinister kind of underlying thing that he's going to be doing in order to appease that leftist base when all of his, economic policies have inevitably failed.
You just made me think. For the years that I've been in politics, I've had people say to me, if we can help build up the church and bring the church into these communities, we can help build up these communities. And what I've seen without really noticing is that the left continues to try to destroy the church. They do everything they can to drive faith out of communities. And you're right. If you can't achieve anything else that is on your agenda, that is an easy target.
That's exactly it. And that's what they always go for. That's what the communists always do. Religion has to go in order for the people to worship the government.
Oh, very true. And religion is joy. And if you take away joy, then you create this reliance. There's only one way to get by, and that is to go to the government and have them take care of you. And even I just heard Jocelyn Benson, who is running for governor in Michigan, say this. She was like, we've got people working 2 jobs and they can't make it by. And that's where the government has to come in and fill in those gaps. And I was like, it's open. It's not even, they're not even hiding it. This is exactly what they're saying. So you've lived it. And I appreciate you being willing to come on and talk about it today. And I appreciate you being in the network with me.
Thank you so much, Tudor. I love listening to your show, and I love seeing you at events. It's really always a good time.
It is. It's always fun. Karol Markowicz, make sure you check out her podcast. You've got 2. Tell us where they are.
The Karol Markowicz Show is my interview show, largely non-political, and then I co-host normally with Mary Catherine Ham, where we do news of the day.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon podcast for this episode and others. Go to TudorDixonPodcast.com, the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can check out the whole video on Rumble or YouTube at Tudor Dixon. And join us next time. Have a blessed day.